Hey everyone, it's me again. So I think I introduced myself already. And today I'm going to talk about Laravel together with Neo, who is one of our senior software developers at About You, working in the Bubble team. Bubble stands for backbone. And yeah, Neo is organizing the Laravel conference in Nigeria, and he has also written like uncountable amount of articles about Laravel. And yeah, he also does some tech speaking. And yeah, so welcome Neo. And just quickly, this is us. And our Twitter handles. Neo is really into Twitter, so you can follow him. Okay, so let's get started. So, what is in this talk? We sit down together and we said, okay, let's do a Laravel talk. But we didn't want to go too much into detail because we thought there is not that much people in Hamburg, as far as we know, that are using Laravel already, except for us maybe. And we are actually using Laravel all throughout our backend systems at About You. And if you've seen my other talk, we are actually quite large architecture-wise. And our entire system is really huge, and we are using Laravel, as I said, almost throughout the entire thing. So we said, okay, let's sit down and let's think about what we can give the people talking about Laravel, share our experience with it. And so we wanted to give a talk on some general ideas, how you might think about your next software projects, which aspects you should consider when choosing the new technology for your new project. And then we also wanted to compare that to Laravel because we just had a lot of experience, and Laravel actually performs quite well in a lot of situations. And yeah, disclaimer, it's a bit opinionated, but we try to keep it out of it. So Neil's going to start with some of the aspects, and then I will get back to you later.
Thanks. Okay, so as you said, Ighodaro, first time in code.talks, and I'm really excited to be here. Now we want to look at it from a perspective of people who are switching to Laravel, or who are interested in switching to Laravel, or are considering it in their companies. And this is the perspective we're going from. One of the first few things you need to consider generally when starting a new project will be the type of project and the scope of your project. Understanding your project and the scope and the future needs and the current needs usually helps you map out everything that you think you might need going forward while building your application. And truth is, it's maybe not very easy to understand how big your application will get or how small it will get. So most times it's better to just have a catch-all. And this is where Laravel really, really shines, in my opinion. I think Laravel is good for small to large projects. I have many small projects on my laptop, gathering dust, but I started most of them with Laravel and have worked with Laravel so many times. And the time it takes from going from 0 to 100 with Laravel is pretty short. And with larger applications or larger projects like at About You, we generally use, for all our infrastructure, or almost all our infrastructure, we use Laravel. For large projects, it works for us. You could also use Laravel for APIs and extra stuff like e-commerce platforms. But there are also projects that you probably shouldn't use Laravel for.
Even though you can do almost anything with Laravel, so we have actually written our part of our business intelligence doing data consolidation. We actually wrote an entire framework based on Laravel and PHP to do data consolidation, which is, let's say I wouldn't have that idea again. But yeah, you can do almost everything. And then there's certain things that don't make sense.
Yeah, so the bottom line, right, is it depends on where you are, but if it works for you, it works for you. And it works for us. Jumping into learning curve. Now we already understand, okay, this is our project and we want to start Laravel, but we're not really into Laravel. How do we get started? One of the few things to consider is also learning curve. How easy is it to jump into Laravel? How quickly is it to get started? And what you want generally is a language with a very low learning curve. This makes it easy for you to pick it up pretty quickly and get started with your project, because I think the faster your project gets to market, the better it is for you. So you need a language with a low learning curve. You also need a framework with a gradual learning curve, which means it goes from low to complex over time as your project, grows in size. And you also need good documentation and additional resources. And Laravel is built with PHP, which I know has a very low learning curve. People can easily get started with PHP pretty easily. You also have Laravel itself, the framework built on PHP, which has a very gradual learning curve. You could start creating models pretty easily, create controllers. But when you start working on a large-scale project, like we do at About You, you start having to learn things that you would ordinarily probably never see in the documentation. So this gradual learning curve makes it easy for people to quickly get started, and as the complexity increases, it gets better. When it comes to documentation, though, I would say it's good enough to get started. It may not be the best documentation in the world, but it's good enough for you to get started pretty quickly and get on board. But when you need to go further, then there are things like Laracast, which is like Netflix, but for Laravel developers. It has really concise lessons, like Laravel from scratch, or what's new in Laravel, or things like building a staging server. So pretty much anything you want to find, you usually find in Laracast. And I think it's a really good learning resource. And I think it's one of the reasons why Laravel, the resources behind Laravel kind of makes it a great framework to use. So let's go back to the documentation. Like I said, it could be more robust, but I don't think that's what documentations are made for. It's better for a documentation to be easy and, get it in quickly, as opposed to being so complex that you can use. So it's quite easy to use and access, and it helps you with your most basic needs, especially when all you want to do is just get started with your project. Now, the documentation itself also explains some parts of how the core framework works, from routing to request to response. And so it's a good documentation. But there are some times you also need to just see the structure of a class. Laravel has an API documentation, which is separate, and it lists everything that might have changed from version 5.8, for instance, to version 6.0. And this can be useful, and I have used it many times to just see, oh, how does the class work? Does it have some extra features that I might have missed? So the API documentation itself is good. So for this talk, we decided to build a demo app. We're going to live code it. And that's a gesture. We're not really going to live code it. But we're going to show how we can build maybe an app, and we're going to put it in context of this presentation on how some parts of the things we're going to speak will relate to the application we're building. So like I said, this is the documentation, and it's pretty easy to see how fast it is to get started with Laravel. You install the Laravel installer, and then you can get started with a simple command like Laravel new blog. And it will usually look something like this in your terminal. So you run Laravel rate my talk, which is the app we're building currently. And then this will use Composer to install all the dependencies that you need in your application for Laravel to work. And once it's done, it's usually pretty fast. Once it's done, you can get started with building your application. However, before you get started, you need good tool sets, right? Every developer needs to have, and we all use different IDEs every time. So you have maybe VS Code or PHP Storm or Atom for those who use it. And then you have really good extensions. So for instance, in VS Code, which I use personally, you could go to the extensions tab and search for Laravel, and then you see a plethora of different extensions. And if, for instance, you're working with a Blade application, Blade is like the templating framework for Laravel views, it can easily do things like autocomplete, which saves a lot of time. Instead of you having to go to the documentation to find out, you can basically use the autocomplete feature that comes with some of these extensions. So I think they are pretty good. Another thing that I would say works in Laravel's favor, at least for us also, is the solutions that come out of the box. So with the Laravel framework just installed, there's some things that are just available to you that you don't have to do too much work to get into. So obviously, when you build your application, you don't want it to live on your laptop. You'd want to have, you want to deploy it, or you'd want to, I don't know, add some payment systems, or you do various things with your application. You don't want it to live on your laptop. Laravel comes out of the box with some pretty cool tools. Some of them Martin will explain a little bit later, but I will focus on a few of them. The first one is Artisan, which is like a command line tool. Artisan you can run in your CLI, and it just gives you really cool commands that you can run. Some of them generate controllers, some generate models, some generate events, some generate migrations, notifications. A lot of stuff are generated using Artisan. And you can actually create your own custom command, which is something we do heavily, especially for us. There's some commands we might run, and we want to make it faster, or we want to run it in the background as a cron job. You can create your own custom commands using Artisan. So I'll say Artisan is a really powerful tool, but getting started, you usually just use Artisan to create controllers and models on its own. One of the other tools that comes with Artisan by default is Tinker. So Tinker is a REPL system that allows you to, so it loads the Laravel framework into your command line. And then you can go PHP, Artisan, Tinker, and then you have your entire application in your command line, and you can play around with it, you could debug with it, you can do whatever, because it's pretty much a Laravel application that runs in terminal. And in the demo here, we're just using the rating model to fetch all the entries in the DB. Maybe not something I'll do, but it's there if you want to do it. You play around with it and have some fun. Another out-of-the-box solution, I would say, is Laravel Mix. So Laravel Mix is it's basically a compiler that runs Webpack underneath, and it helps you compile your front-end assets most times. And Laravel itself is not specifically designed to be opinionated about the front-end part of it. So you could decide to use Vue, or you decide to use React, or you decide to use Angular, or for those who use Angular. Laravel itself is not very specific about what UI framework to use. So let's assume with this application now, we want to add some front end to it, and we will require the Laravel UI, and we'll require the Laravel UI, and then we will run PHP Artisan UI view, which will install the view into our application, and then we'll have access to use Vue in the application. And yeah, the slide is broken. There we go. Okay, so you run composer require Laravel UI, and then this should import the UI package for Laravel. And then at this point, you can use Artisan to either load Vue or React, and then you can start working with it. We are going to work with Vue in this application, just because I really like Vue. But you can use whatever framework, front-end framework, but out of the box itself, Laravel comes with, the Laravel UI package comes with Vue and React. So this is what a mix file looks like. You just have the mix.js, and then the one on the right is the raw resource that we want to compile, and the one on the left is the raw resource, and the one on the right is where we want to compile it into. So in this case, we have compiled the resources JS app.js into the public JS folder. This is a basic structure of how it will look, but in some applications, it could grow a whole lot bigger than this. Now, for our app, we basically wanted everyone here to be able to rate this talk because we want to see what you think about our presentation. So we're going to make a controller. We'll call it the rate controller. And then afterwards, we're going to make a model. And we're going to be using the PHP Artisan. So we can make a controller, using PHP Artisan, make controller and the name of the controller. And at this point, the controller is created. We could also make our model and migration, which will help us set up the database. Migrations work in a way where instead of having to go to your DB and create your tables manually, you create a migration for every change you want to do in your DB. This makes it easier for everyone in the team to work together, and you know you have a uniform database. So even if you want to drop a column, you create a migration for it. This makes it super, super easy. There are no conflicts, and I would say migrations are very, very useful tools out of the box. Now, evolution trends. Why should you even care about Laravel itself? Laravel has been in development for a long time, since 2011, and it's open source. And one of the gripes I usually had with Laravel before now was there was no semantic versioning, and it's really painful. Trust me, I know, to upgrade a very big scale application to the next version because you're really scared about breaking something. You upgrade and suddenly something breaks. But with version 6, there is semantic versioning, which helps you to upgrade. You know what upgrade you're getting into. If it's a major upgrade, then your team is mentally prepared to upgrade. If it's just a minor version, then you can upgrade. And with the Google Trends, you can see just how popular Laravel started from zero noise to being the one with the most noise, and then you see other frameworks like Symphony and code.talks pretty much just going downwards after then. Now, another thing to consider is security. Obviously, hackers want to come and steal your stuff with magic. We usually don't understand how it happens, but it does happen sometimes. Laravel itself comes with some out-of-the-box security features that could help you not have to worry about it, at least in the initial stages of your application. There are things like validation of data, which is automatic. It invalidates sessions by itself. The passwords are stored using really strong encryption. There is CSRF protection, and then there's SQL injection protection, all out of the box. So you don't even have to worry about these things, or you at least not in the beginning. Maybe afterwards, you maybe have to, tighten up your security from the back end or anything. But from Laravel's perspective, it does all it needs to do. So maybe if you had something like a CSRF attack, you wouldn't need to worry about it. And this is one of the few things I would say, and I should give it to you so you continue.
Cool. So what I want to talk about is project complexity. So I think thinking about project complexity is a really essential thing when you start a new project. So why is that? Because when you're talking about a large-scale application, there might be a lot of ways you can measure that. So for example, you can count on the number of classes, the number of tests you have, the lines of code, number of routes, or even the number of to-do comments in your project. But that kind of misses the point, right? Because the real problem with project complexity is not whether your machine will be able to execute your code. It will always execute the code as long as there are no errors. The real problem with complexity is that developers can't read the code at some point. And that's really the key thing you should think about. So, of course, there's best practices in architecture, which you can consider building a new application. But in a lot of frameworks and a lot of technologies, you actually have to put a lot of effort up front into your project to get started, because it is not giving you like a fixed structure to create your project. And that's really something that can mess up your project. And it will actually affect a lot of stuff that's really important for your project progression. And for example, of course, your development time will go down because you actually will have to read through the entire project every time you want to add something. Because if you don't have good modularization or use dependency injection in a sensible way, you will actually have to read every single line of code to add a new feature. And I will also add error occurrences and also increase the intro time that you need to get a new person started within the project. So if you have a good separation of concerns and you have your setup of your project in a lot of services, it will actually be really easy to have the things decapsulated, and that way, you can just get someone who knows the framework and PHP, for example, with Laravel, into the project and say, hey, this is the API you have, or this is the event you need to catch. Just add this functionality. And because it's not depending on any of the other stuff, it will not break anything, and it makes everything way more maintainable. And in contrast to some other frameworks where you actually have to put a lot of thought into it. And Laravel supports you by that, by having, even though it's really flexible, mostly a really straightforward folder structure. So it's quite opinionated, but in general, it does get you started really, really easily. And as Neo showed earlier, there's a lot of commands that will actually create the essential parts of Laravel. So if you want to add a controller, an event listener, or anything else, it will actually, you don't have to think like, where do I put this? There's a predefined place for everything, and out of the box, it will just work for you. But you can also edit it really flexible. So I think that's like the first thing that I think is really a pro for Laravel. So if you have service providers, what are service providers? Does anyone know what a service provider is? No Laravel people here? Okay, good audience for this talk. So a service provider is one of the core architecture concepts of Laravel. So when you boot up the Laravel application, the kernel gets started, and the kernel will actually go into the app config and take everything that is a service provider, that extends the service provider class out of there, and you can register them. And also all the services within Laravels are also based on service providers. So there's a service provider for events, there's a service provider for debugging. There's just everything in the application of Laravel in the framework is based on service providers, which makes it really flexible. And you can also, if you want, at some point, I get to that in a later slide, throw out stuff you don't need, and it will still work because they're all independent of each other. And that's really the big advantage of this. So let's say you add a service provider, and for example here, we have a send email service notification, which is registered in this new email service provider, and we put it out into a module. Whoops. And it will completely independently run without influencing any of the other parts of the application, because you don't, like, it's completely separate. So the question is, how do these things communicate? So dependency injection can be quite a pain, but Laravel has a lot of solutions for that. So Laravel has a lot of other solutions, like service containers, where you can actually inject and register in the service providers as well, and then you can just use them throughout the applications. It has a functionality for singletons and a lot of other stuff. But the most effective part on how to communicate between those services is not yelling, but actually the event system that is built into Laravel out of the box. So the event system is based on a really simple concept of events, event service event listeners, and then the service event listener will actually handle it. So here we just created a really, we created a really simple event class, which you can also create via Artisan, and we'll just put it in the normal place. And as I said, you can also move it to another module. So basically what it takes in here is a new user. So when you create a new user, it will automatically create this event, take the payload of the user in, and will serialize it, store it in a database, and then the event service provider, there is, on the one hand side, you can register it in the event service provider, which is like the main part of the application, where most of the people might do that. And then you just have to, as you see, you can just put the class that you want to listen to, or the event you want to listen to, and then define which event listener should listen to that class. So whenever you go into your application and use event fire, and it will just trigger that event, and it will go out into the framework, and every event listener, you can actually define multiple here, will just get that event, take it in, and then use it in the event listener. What makes more sense, at least in from my point of view, is actually like modularizing your project up front, and then use the events only in the emails, for example, in this email service provider, because you then have the decoupled system and you can grow really easily. So you can, like, you have everything in place, you have everything in their own module, and it really scales really well. Or it really, like, keeps the complexity bearable. And then you can see here, so basically this is the event listener we had, and it just takes in the register method, the register event we have, and it just like fires off an email and sends a push notification, and this is coming like everything of that is out of the box, even the email services. So the next thing you always should consider in a new project is performance. And I think it's really hard to determine performance in a project because, I mean, the easy answer to performance issues is more servers. So, I mean, you could always counteract the argument of, oh, it doesn't perform really well with, I just put a new server there. And I still want to evaluate it because I think performance is essential for certain parts. So as I said, we use it, or as Neo said, we are using it all throughout our infrastructure in the backend of the shop, for example. But we are also using it in our business intelligence for data consolidation. And we had a lot of problems with the performance of Laravel there because it's not meant to do that. So it does actually perform quite good for APIs and just basic web services, but it's not meant to do data consolidation. And we still did that. So I brought you one of the essential parts of Laravel is the collections. So you have, usually in PHP you don't have collections, and Laravel provides you with a solution for that, and they are really nice to use, but they are already also not as performant. So we had to actually rebuild the performance, the collections all by ourselves, because I had a lot of problems, and like this is like a test we wrote by ourselves, and it actually, like what it does is basically create 10,000 random items or objects, and then just performs all those operations on here, like 10,000 on these 10,000 items. And you can see with 10,000 items, like the difference is not that big. But let's go to 100,000 items, and you can actually see that the Laravel collections are not performing really well. We are like sometimes here already 10 times faster, and if you like push this to the limit, you can actually see that there is parts there, for example, where we completely outperforming, especially this one. It's crazy. Like there's 1 million objects, and there we are having like 250 milliseconds. This is Laravel 5.7, and this is the new version of Laravel. So yeah, if you want to go for performance, don't use the new Laravel collections. But we actually got asked to do a pull request for that, so maybe soon the Laravel collections will be fast. So conclusion, performance is a really big issue, even though you have the counter argument of like, I could just scale up my infrastructure, but still certain parts don't do data consolidation with your Laravel framework, even though you can, obviously. It works really good. So next thing is scalability. I touched on that already. So at some point, you start your project, and you think, oh, it's just going to be a fun project, or there's not going to be a lot of traffic on there, so you expect something like this. So not a lot of people, and then you actually end up having something like this, because there's just a lot of people wanting to use your service suddenly. And that actually is a problem at some point, especially when it comes to like the scalability. And there's a lot of frameworks that are really easy to host because there's a lot of tutorials and online documentation on how to do it. But I just want to get to that in a second. So the first thing Laravel is providing that's really cool for scaling application is the queuing functionality. I'm not going to go into queuing exactly because it's like, it's not that, but it's like, it's a talk for itself. But the basic functionality of a queuing system is not like out of this world, right? So basically what it does is you take in a request, and when the request comes in, you take all the operations that you want to do on that are not time sensitive, and then just return the response. And then you have this queuing job, which you can create, put the payload in, push it to a queue within the Laravel framework, and then there's a worker running in the background which will actually do all the computation you told it to do afterwards, and you're not losing any time. So that's really powerful, and it keeps you from having problems when you instantly have like peak loads on your application that you didn't expect. Of course, at some point there will be problems, but this is just like an easy way to avoid outages if you have unexpected scaling applications. So also what's really nice, Neo already touched on that, there's out-of-the-box scalable services. So as I said, a lot of other frameworks provide you with documentation on how to do stuff. Laravel is so widely used that Taylor, the creator, and the team behind it actually created a lot of services which are just tailored to Laravel, and they provide out-of-the-box solutions. And for example, the newest one is Vapor here, and Vapor is basically a microservice hosting solution where you can just like create an account and then push your code there, and it will do everything. It's based on AWS, the Lambda functions, and it will do all the functionality for you. Also, there's Forge, which is a bit older. It's basically server management, also completely gets out of the box all the functionality you need with Laravel. So there's a Redis unstop, there's a database, all of that is provided there for you, and it's really nice to use. And then there's Envoyer, which enables you to have zero downtime deployment. So we'll start a new service if you deploy something, and then like take over and just redirect the traffic onto the new server that you just deployed. So the last part, I think that's really important when you consider a new technology, is the community, because that's basically where you get your resources. And I'm just going to look at the GitHub repositories here, and we actually tried to find really hard, we tried really hard to find a backend framework, doesn't matter which programming language, that has more stars on GitHub than Laravel. And can anyone like instantly or just like out of the box come up with a framework we didn't cover which might be bigger? Because I would really like to know if there is any. Any suggestions? Hand raise? No. Okay, like we like looked for at least half an hour for frameworks that we could see. But yeah, as you can see, Laravel is currently the most used backend framework on GitHub at least. And that really is great in a lot of ways, because if you have a lot of people already using the project, and I mean stars are just the top of the iceberg, you also have a big community on Stack Overflow, where you will most likely feel any or find any problem you will encounter at some point. And then also, which is really cool, is that there is actually a special type of conferences just for Laravel. And then there's 3 official ones, one in the US, one in the EU, and one in Australia. And there's tons, like just in London, there's 3. And I think there's at least 5 in Germany. So, and now Africa gets started as well. I don't know, how many conferences are there? Is it the first one?
Yeah,
okay.
That I know of at least.
Okay, so they are getting started as well. And yeah, there's also a lot of Laravel forums that are specifically tailored to Laravel. So, for example, Laravel IO is basically Stack Overflow only for Laravel. And then there's also Laracast, the Laracast forum. Neo already mentioned Laracast. And they also have a forum where you can find basically any problem you will ever encounter. Yeah, so we wanted to show you the application. Neo, you want to do your metrics thing?
Yeah, sure. So just going to try to deploy something, not really deploying it, but yeah, we're going to try and deploy it. And then we're done. Okay, so we already created it because we tried to do live coding, but the live coding gods did not work for us. But we created this app, which is based on Laravel, and you could just use it to rate the talk and see basically how it works. And we also open sourced it, but The link is not here yet,
It was
but
funny.
we'll share it. Yeah.
The repository had 3 stars without even having anything in it.
Yeah, that was fun.
Okay, yeah, so just go to the website and maybe leave us a rating and a comment there. And I think that's it. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed it, learned something for your new project, and maybe consider using Laravel next. If you have any further questions, like we could just touch barely the minimum here we could have, but even though it's really easy to get started with Laravel, there's like a lot to dig in. And if you have any questions, just come up to us, or there's this Slido where you can also ask questions on anything. And otherwise, thank you. Okay, so are there any questions? Laravel, how do you manage growth of your application? Do you use modular structure? If yes, how? So the more detailed answer to that is, so we are using modular structure, but you have to consider that within About You, we have, I have not really an idea how many services that are just independent. So we have so many departments within our company, and they all have a lot of services also running on Laravel. So I can't speak for the other departments, but as I said, using the service provider modularization makes it easy to scale. And as like we got this idea, and it's like it should be a basic concept of using Laravel. I'm really sure that most others are using it. We're using it in the big data framework. We have like different parts that we added in later, and it was actually the refactoring was a little bit pain still, but I mean, who has ever had a refactoring which was easy and nice to do? But yeah, it does make it easier to refactor at some point, and yeah, we're actually using modularization, at least for the project that I've worked in. Also, code.talks website is based on that. Is there any other ones?
There's
Okay, didn't get that one. You want to answer that?
Which of them?
That one.
Okay, so there's a question here that says, why has the event no interface for the handle method? Well, I guess we'll have to ask Taylor that. But not sure why it doesn't. It does make sense that it should have, but it just doesn't. But it doesn't really. So the thing is, you could create your own interface if you do not feel comfortable with it not having an
Actually,
interface.
I think there is an interface.
Is there?
Yeah.
We can just quickly
I
check.
think that was actually my fault, because I created this
And then you removed it.
not with the Artisan
Shame.
command. I'm sorry.
Okay, cool.
Okay, we have some other ones coming in. I'm not gonna use this one. I didn't hear anyone laughing, so no one is actually trying to use our application. Or did anyone actually try it? Raise your hands if you tried it. So no one clicked, it sucks. Good.
That's a good thing.
Okay, what is the advantage of over Symphony? It looks much like that. I personally never used Symphony. From what I've gotten from the Symphony community when I've been at PHP conferences so far is that that's more like an opinion thing. So some people don't like the magic that Laravel comes with. So Symphony, there's a lot of explicit implementations. So you have to do everything explicit, as far as I know. And Laravel, you can always, like, if you're in the Laravel community, everyone is always talking about the Laravel magic, because Laravel out of the box does a lot of things for you. There's a ton of stuff where it's actually not that easy to figure out why that just happened. Which, like, if you get into the framework, at some point you will actually understand it, but just out of the box, you should just like go with it and say like, okay, it does all these things for me. But in general, I think that's, for me, that would be the biggest difference to Symphony. That Symphony, you have to explicitly do most of the stuff, and with Laravel, there's just a lot of magic.
And just to add to what you said, there is a question here that says, as Laravel is based on Symphony, why don't you just use Symphony full stack framework? again, for those who don't know, Laravel actually uses a lot of Symphony in the back. Basically pulls a lot of Symphony packages, like for the request or the response. But one of the beauty with Laravel is how easily it makes all the how easy it is for people to jump into it, because it actually builds stuff on top of Symphony sometimes, not every time. And this magic is good for some, and it might not be good for others. I know personally, sometimes, or actually all the time, we try to, especially with large-scale applications, we try to avoid all the magic that Laravel does, because you run into performance issues, especially if you have a lot of requests per minute or per second. So it basically depends on you. I don't like Symphony specifically, but that's just my opinion. I prefer the way Laravel does things, but again, it's still going to boil down to what you want as a person.
And also to add on that is that, so we didn't evaluate Symphony against all these things. It would be actually quite interesting. If someone has like a lot of experience with Symphony, I would like to talk to them afterwards and like try to compare on these aspects, like Symphony versus Laravel. But as you like saw, for example, the community is an obvious point to use Laravel. The community for Laravel is just so much bigger. And yeah, that's like, I mean, the points we made for Laravel is, as I said, really opinionated. So they might be true for you or not. So if you're using Laravel or not, or over Symphony, yeah, that's like more, that can be, I think, like I said, it's more a taste thing. So I like the out-of-the-box functionality of Laravel. If you don't like a lot of things getting done out of the box for you and do more of the implementation, yeah, maybe Symphony is better.
There's another interesting one that says, do you build microservices with Lumen? I would say I have tried. Company-wise, I don't think there's any that uses Lumen. I'm not sure.
We are using Lumen in part of the business intelligence. As I said, I can only speak for the departments that I've worked in, but we're using Lumen for a few projects, but not in general. So we're doing some, not sure if I can say that, but so we have this new cloud that we're now extending to other services and like get people on board with our cloud infrastructure, and to like, for example, to consolidate their data, we're actually using microservices, but I'm not sure if we're using Laravel or Lumen there. But like, I think Lumen would be in some cases a better choice, but also now that Laravel 6.0 is out, it comes without a UI and all of those baggages that usually Laravel came with, and you can actually trim it down really to the bare minimum, where it's not that much different to Lumen anymore. I'm actually not sure how much they differ now. So.
What is your experience with the unit testing in Laravel?
Oh, so that's actually really nice. So Laravel comes with an entire unit testing framework built into it. So it does provide you with an entire virtual testing environment where you can have like databases that are just temporarily created, have your testing data in that. And yeah, just it does all the click events. You can do front-end testing, you can do the back-end testing. You have unit tests, you have, yeah. So I think testing is actually like something that Laravel is really capable of. Usually, I think most people don't tend to write that many tests, but at least on the Q project, we had, when I left, we had like 89% test coverage. I don't want to get into a discussion about test and mutation coverage, but test coverage, 98%, sorry, 98.
Okay, do you have services built without Laravel?
Yeah, we actually do. There is some parts in at About You which are not using Laravel or PHP. So for example, at least from what the last information I had was that our backend rendering, for example, is done in JavaScript. So we are not using the Blade engine that Laravel comes with, because we have our own front end built for that, and we are actually using JavaScript to do the backend rendering there. And also parts of the business intelligence are not using Laravel because, yeah, doing machine learning with PHP. I don't know. I've seen people do that, but that seems like a weird idea.
This is a good one. Do you have any tips to make me convince my company to switch from Symphony to Laravel, coming from an ex-Laravel developer?
Oh, yeah. So this is basically the idea of the talk, right? So, like, we will publish the slides, and yeah, basically the idea of the whole presentation is how can you pitch Laravel to your PM maybe, and like make them use Laravel. So I think like a lot of the aspects we touched on are really important to especially project managers or product owners, like speed of development, low error occurrences, and so on. And yeah, that way I think just it makes sense. So basically, we will publish the slides, and mostly you can just use the slides. I have another talk that touches a bit, like goes a bit more deeper into service providers and how easy, why it's good for scalable applications. I don't have that online yet, but I might also do that afterwards. So if you're interested in that, you can just write me an email.
I would also add that since you're an ex-Laravel developer, you probably already know all these things we highlighted also. But I would say from a business perspective, I don't think it's very easy for a company to just switch stacks. So you might be fighting a losing battle if you want to tell them to move their entire stack from Symphony to Laravel. But I would say start small. You know, maybe you have some other projects that the company wants to start, and then you use most of the stuff here to kind of pitch it. And generally, I think if they see the value of running with Laravel, maybe they wouldn't change their entire infrastructure to run Laravel. But slowly, I think they might be able to see the value of running some projects on Laravel. Yeah, I would say.
Okay, just one more. Then just one more question, but I really want to answer that because it's a good one. Have you tried to replace Eloquent or use other ORMs in Laravel? So we had that discussion actually in our company, and so as I said, one of the main advantages if you're building a new company, just to get back on that one really quickly, because I just wanted to finish that thought. If you're using Laravel, as we do throughout the entire company, you have the benefit of being able to switch developers from low intensity projects to high intensity projects, because you have this tech stack that is like the same throughout the entire company. So if you have a project that you have to put a lot of extra developers on, usually you can't just take someone from another department and put it in there because they're using a different technology. But if you have a transparent tech stack throughout the company, you can actually compensate high loads on certain departments with developers from other departments. That's also something that we are doing, that we are doing, and why also we did our business intelligence with Laravel. To get back to that one, Eloquent. For those of you who don't know it, Eloquent is the ORM that basically grants you easy access to through Laravel to your database, and it does provide you with a bunch of databases, so you can use out of the box already a whole bunch of them. But it does have a lot of issues, and to answer the question, we actually built an entirely new ORM for the Cube project, which is in some parts, I can't say the metric, but it's a lot faster, and also we included extra functionality, like you can also query Google BigQuery, and you can also export data to Google BigQuery. And Eloquent, it's out of the box. If you're getting started with Laravel, it's really nice to use, and I think Taylor wouldn't like it if I say that, but at some point, if you're getting really having we do 300 million requests per day, you should think of replacing it with something more performant. And I think that's
sometimes just using the DB facade. So there's a DB class that comes with Laravel. Is usually always it's always faster than using Eloquent itself.
Yeah.
So sometimes you could just switch out Eloquent for the other one, and that usually works. I would say.
Okay. So I hope we answered all the questions. You enjoyed the talk, and have a good rest of the Code Talks.